Hey guys, hope everyone's having a great day. As many of you know, the first college football playoff rankings came out this week, and I, for the most part, I wasn't really that surprised um, about the rankings. There were definitely some changes, and the committee is looking at one pattern that I really noticed is that the committee is looking at like how teams are playing more than the resume. And one team I think that stood out was LSU Notre Dame. Notre Dame is undefeated, but they have really struggled in games, and I will get to that later on in the video. And LSU, they did have a hiccup on their schedule, but they have looked pretty solid, I think. All right, so I'm gonna go with the top bottom rankings, and then I'll work my way up. So number 21 is NC State. Not really surprised there. Boston College is ranked number 22. Fresno State ranked number 23. Iowa State is ranked number 24, and 25 is Virginia. I guess the question I have is this: why is Iowa State ranked number 24 and Houston isn't even ranked? Can please somebody explain that? Why Houston isn't even ranked, but Iowa State is? I know that Iowa State has looked pretty good overall. They have a loss to Iowa, who is in the top 25. They have a loss to Oklahoma, which has looked pretty solid, but they lost to TCU, and TCU has looked, quite frankly, awful this year. I mean, TCU just lost to Kansas on the road, and when you lose to Kansas, you're basically going to have a pretty long season over there. And Houston, I thought, has had a far better resume than Iowa State. Houston has blowout wins over Arizona and South Florida. But I guess the reason why Iowa State is ranked is because they have a good win over West Virginia. And Texas Tech was Houston's only setback. They lost 63-49, but that game really was much closer than that. And I just think Iowa State, that's a joke. Iowa State ranked number 24 in the country. I think that is just a complete joke. Alright, so I'll go 16 through 20. Number 16 is Iowa. Number 17 is Texas. Mississippi State at ranked number 18. Number 19 is Syracuse. And number 20 is Texas A&M. One pattern that I'm really getting from the college football committee is that they are completely biased on the SEC. I mean, they have I think it's like 6 teams in the top 20 or something like that. That's just something I don't get either. And Mississippi State, they do have some pretty solid losses. They lost to Kentucky, and I can't remember who else they lost to, but they have a loss to Kentucky. I think they have a loss to Florida. I mean, their schedule is has been tough, but I think they're doing pretty well. And maybe Auburn. I know Auburn is struggling, but Auburn looked pretty good at the time. And they did beat Texas A&M last week, and Texas A&M has looked pretty solid as of late. And Texas A&M's only losses were to Alabama and Clemson. It's not a bad resume for Jimbo Fisher's first season as the Aggie head coach, and they recently lost to Texas A&M. Lost to Mississippi State, excuse me. Texas isn't bad, I don't think. They did have a couple of losses that really hurt them. The loss to Maryland at the start of the year. And Maryland has, quite frankly, not looked too good since. And they lost to Oklahoma State recently. I know Oklahoma State hasn't looked too good either, but playing at Stillwater is tough, but I still think that they should beat a team like Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State kind of has a down year this year. Alright, so I'm going through 11 through 15. Florida is ranked number 11. UCF is ranked number 12. Number 13 is West Virginia. 14 is Penn State. And 15 is Utah. I don't know why Florida and UCF are ahead of West Virginia, honestly. Because Florida has had good wins against teams that have looked pretty good early, but they haven't looked good since. They do have a very good win over LSU, though, which helps their resume out. And UCF, they don't really have any good wins. I was looking at their schedule. They do not have one good win against a top 25 team. I may have boosted the ranking a little bit for NC State if they would have played West Virginia. I mean, NC State has had a pretty solid schedule. I mean, they have losses to Clemson and to Syracuse, which have looked pretty good. So if they would have beaten West Virginia, and I probably would have picked NC State, honestly, because it was in Raleigh, playing in a showdown between Ryan Finley and Will Grier. And I was really looking forward to that matchup, but unfortunately that game was wiped out due to a hurricane. And West Virginia has looked pretty solid. They have a win over Texas Tech. They blew out Baylor. Their only loss was to Iowa State, which has looked pretty solid. I honestly think Florida's going to win the rest of their games. I think they'll go 10-2. Just looking at their schedule, I do not see them losing to anybody else. I mean, I definitely think UCF has a tougher schedule. I mean, Cincinnati is on there. They play Temple on Thursday, and they play UCF later on in the year. And I really think that they do have a tougher schedule than Florida. Florida, I mean, they play Missouri, South Carolina, Florida State. They play teams that are really not that good, that had pretty solid expectations going in, but don't have good expectations now. Alright, so now I'm into my top 10. Number 10, I have Ohio State. They had a damaging loss to Purdue, which really hurts their resume. And quite frankly, they really don't have that tough of a resume. Penn State was a good win, but they've lost a couple of games. So they've really done what I expected, but that loss to Purdue was horrible. And Purdue may only go 6-6 possibly. Maybe even 5-7. I was looking at Purdue's schedule, and they have a pretty tough road ahead of them. So I think the committee really looked at that Purdue loss for Ohio State in the heart. And number 9, I have Kentucky. Number 8, I have Washington State. Kentucky has a much better resume than Washington State, but Washington State has really impressed me. I think they are better than any time they've are under Mike Leach. And just with the off-season issues with Tyler Hilinski getting injured and stuff, and just the university trying to embrace that, I just think that they have really, really transitioned well. I actually picked Wyoming to beat Washington State in week 1 because I didn't know what Washington State was going to be like, but Washington State has looked, quite frankly, really, really good. And Gardner Minshew, I think, is the real deal. Minshew is leading the nation in passing yards. He was a transfer from East Carolina, and I think he has really, really done a magnificent job of leading the Cougars this year. Kentucky has not looked great. Their offense is not good, but their defense has looked pretty good. And Mark Stoops, he's one of my runner-up for the Coach of the Year. I think Mike Leach and Mark Stoops are my 2 coaches for the Robinson Award of the Year candidates. I'm scratching my head on Georgia. I know they lost to LSU, but they pretty much done what I've expected, honestly. But I think the reason why they're number 6 is because they got hammered by LSU. They didn't play a close game against LSU. They got hammered. And I just think the committee just values Michigan a lot more. And I think Michigan, by far, is the better team than Georgia. Michigan has that loss to Notre Dame, but I think Michigan has looked better than Notre Dame in general. Alright, so number 5, I have Michigan. And then I'll reveal my top 4. And I think that Michigan does have some nice wins on their schedule. They have a win over Wisconsin. They have a win over Northwestern. And just in their last game, they beat Michigan State. They finally got over the hump that Jim Harbaugh was lacking. Their only setback was against Notre Dame, which is not a bad loss at all for them. And I thought and here are my top 4. Number 1, I have Alabama. I think that's a clear-cut number 1. I definitely don't see them losing a game anytime soon. Yes, I even have LSU struggling against Alabama this weekend. I just think with Tua Tagovailoa, 25 touchdown passes, no interceptions. I mean, that number just boggles me. I mean, this Alabama team, I think, is the best under Nick Saban, which is hard to say because he's had some pretty damn good football teams. And number 2, I have Clemson. Clemson really hasn't played anybody, but they're undefeated. They've been on this stage before. That's why I had them number 2, and they had them number 2. Number 3, I have LSU. Yes, I have them in my top 4. Even though LSU had a setback against Florida. But they have looked pretty good, honestly. They have wins over Miami, Auburn, Georgia. They've had some nice wins on their schedule. And I think even if they lose to Alabama this weekend, and I think they will, I think that they have a good shot at being in the college football playoff, even with 2 losses. Notre Dame, I have them number 4. They're 7-0. They really haven't had that hard of a schedule. Yeah, they lost to they have a win over Michigan, but that's really their only good win. Everyone else on their schedule that they have beaten has struggled or have looked good at the time, but they've fallen off. But they really haven't had that good of a schedule so far. And they have an easy schedule coming up. I can't remember who they have, but I know by looking at their schedule that they have a pretty easy ride. And they did struggle against teams like Pittsburgh, Vanderbilt, and Ball State. They really struggled against those 3 teams. And those 3 teams, quite frankly, haven't looked good. That's why I have Notre Dame at 4. And the reason why they're undefeated is why I have them at number 4. And LSU hasn't really struggled at number 3. Even though they have that hiccup over Florida, I still think they are at number 3. And Michigan lost to Notre Dame. I think that's good. Is at number 5. I think they have looked better than Georgia, honestly. And some people have asked me, why don't you have UCF in your top 4? I love UCF. Don't get me wrong. Scott Frost was a hell of a coach. I think he'll turn around Nebraska, even though he's not doing so good there. I think he will turn around Nebraska eventually. And just that UCF doesn't have a top 25 win, and I'm pretty sure they won't be in the playoff this year. Alright, so this is what the top 25 rankings look like. If you have any questions on this post, or you want to see other teams that are ranked in the top 25, you can comment on this video or give it a like on the subscription. I will try and respond to your questions overall. I pretty much didn't get really any surprises from the top 25. I just didn't agree with Iowa State being in the top 25. I don't know why Iowa State's in the top 25 rather than Houston. And I don't know why West Virginia is ranked number 13. Because they haven't had that tough of a schedule either. And then I even tempted to put Utah State in there too. I think I did have them in like the top 25 because Utah State's only slow setback was against Michigan State. And that was like a touchdown loss, I believe it was. But Utah State has looked pretty solid this year. Alright, that wraps it up for the first week of the college football playoff rankings. If you have any questions, like I said, you can comment on the video below. Or you can subscribe to my video. And I'll try and get back to you for my reactions of week 11 for next week. Until then, hope you have a great day.